Remember wanting to be something when you were a kid? Basketball ninjas, astro firemen, princess doctors. I wanted to be Thor. I don't know why exactly. There was just something about the mythos that called out to me. Something that fired my imagination. It was certainly simple, and it often contradicted itself, but that just left more room for me to make it my own. So there was Thor. He was the good son. I like that. But he left most of the heavy responsibility to his dad, and he got in trouble a lot on a regular basis. He would also make and solve all of his problems by hitting them with a hammer. Not only that, but he had a chariot that was pulled by a couple of giant badass goats. What's not to love? So, sadly, you can see I did not grow up to become Thor. That would be crazy. Nobody grows up to become Thor. Except for maybe that guy. And of course, he couldn't become Thor if these gentlemen hadn't decided to become Thor first. Now, if you don't recognize Mr. Lee and Mr. Kirby, perhaps you'll recognize this. Point is, countless creators have spent time being Thor, being influenced by the Norse mythology. Writers like Neil Gaiman and Douglas Adams. J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth is heavily influenced by the Norse mythology. Artists, sculptors, painters, designers, composers have all spent time being Thor. Now, let me take a little bit of this childhood fantasy of mine and tie it into the real world, and adult world more specifically, of jobs and business and money. Since 2011, the Marvel Comics version of Thor has appeared in 2 films. The total gross of those 2 films has been just over $1.9 billion. That's not counting the toys and the comics and the video games and the lunchboxes and the Happy Meals. $1.9 billion because a couple of guys, in this case, these guys, spent a little time being Thor. Suddenly my childhood dream, not so silly. Anyways, it's all about the first spark, and I want to kind of spend a little time getting to think about that. Now, it's very important to think about how your spark grows up with you. I very much doubt that anybody in this room still realistically wants to be a ninja. If you do, great. Now, Thor, he just opened a door for me, him and others, a door to reading, a door to drawing, a door to writing and storytelling. Thor led me to the creative arts. Now, I wound up being the guy who just couldn't get enough of it. And when I went to school, fortunately, other things resonated with me too. If I was just a mythology guy, I'd be standing up in front of you in a hat and cape. And I'm glad that's not happening. Math and science was another love of mine. I didn't really find them too much until I got into school. But then when I did, I pursued the 2 of them all the way throughout. I thought the world of numbers was just as magical, just as wonderful. The way the multiplication table for 9 mirrors itself halfway down seemed artistic to me. I loved the concept of equal and opposite reactions, and the fact that even inanimate objects could exert a force. I followed both my pursuits all the way through high school, and when it became time for college, I applied both for physics and for fine arts. So when I got accepted, that's when I was faced with the first hard decision of my young life. I knew science had a stronger career path. I knew college was going to cost an awful lot of money. I knew I didn't know as much as I thought I did. And I still don't. So I sat down and I asked myself, what makes you happy? It's kind of a simple question, but it's a good one to ask ourselves every once in a while. So I sat down, had a few sleepless nights, and I answered that question. And the answer was art, and let me tell you why. I realized that if I became an artist and couldn't hack it or didn't like it, then going back to school for a science degree was a pretty sound career move. While on the flip side, if I became a scientist and found it less than satisfactory, then going back to art school for the risky prospects of an art career, coupled with doubling my debt, that just wasn't going to happen. So staying true to my own structure, my own beliefs, I used my own version of the scientific method of logic and prediction to make a choice for art. And at the same time, as I packed my bags to go to art school, I promised myself I would never turn my back on my first love of math and science. And I did. I come back to that in just a minute. Now, I got right out of school, and I had some very rewarding work at some incredibly unfortunate pay. And then I had student loans, and I had rent and a car, and art supplies, a girlfriend, now wife. And I realized that I needed a job. So I became a graphic designer. It wasn't glamorous, but it was good. And I did that for a long time without ever losing sight of my inspirations. I was still drawing, I was still plotting, I was still writing. But it was all private. It was all not reaching the world, and I could feel that something was wrong. So, in 2004, that changed when I created my gaming company, Bent Castle Workshops. That was the single scariest thing I have ever done in my life, and I want to say I've cut my leg open with a chainsaw. Since I was 13 years old, I had always had a job, and even though now I still had a job, I was suddenly in control of every single aspect of it. It wasn't just the financial pressures, although there were many. It was really the freedom. Now, anybody who's ever started their own business will understand where I'm coming from when I say that freedom is terrifying, but it's also fun. I actually had a meeting in the early days of our company where I sat opposite my partner, and he and I were just saying, vampires, superheroes, zombies, monsters. And we just did this for a while, creating a list of games that we might be interested in. We weren't thinking about how these games were played. We were just starting off from a position of joy, things that we liked, things that were fun, because we knew we'd need this joy. We'd need this spark for when things got tough. And certainly when you're making a game from scratch, there's lots of tough times ahead. Now, we started with a game that we called Scallywags. And this is a pirate game, and it's a mix and match game of pirates. You win by building up a crew of mix-match cards. It's kind of a cutthroat fun thing. But we had played games all our lives, but we had never actually built one before. And we found out that building a game like Scallywags suddenly involves an awful lot of math. Let me give you an example. Scallywags has over 27,000 different character combinations, all of which I had to draw and make sure they lined up. They have optional 2- and 3-card sets that create new rules that affect gameplay. They have event cards that can drastically alter the way things are done in the game. It has individual cards that can toggle whether or not a character is or isn't playable. The end result, what I'm getting at here, is there's a ton of math. A ton of math. Every time we'd come up with a new strategy, a new way of playing the game, because it didn't exist until we made it, we'd have to sit down and crunch the numbers and run the probabilities to see whether or not that strategy was even viable. So just as I get back in contact with my artistic muse, I'm back in contact with my math and science, and everything just kind of came together, and I was in heaven. So Scallywags was a success, and that led to Numbers League. Numbers League is a superhero math game, so even more on target now. And the thing I really love about Numbers League is we designed it while playtesting Scallywags. We were moving the cards around and altering the rules so much that we stopped seeing the cards themselves. We just saw the mechanics behind them. So then we started playing with the mechanics themselves. And from that play, we got Numbers League. Now everybody, it's been said here today, in fact I think a lot of us, that's why we're here today. We want to make the world a better place. And Numbers League was really my first attempt to do that. I took all the things from my childhood that I loved and it put them together. It was creative, it was whimsical, it was comic booky, it made math fun. The goal of Numbers League was to take that spark I felt and share it when math and science clicked with me. Just share just a little bit of it. And I'm happy to say, it worked. 6 years later, Numbers League has had multiple printings. We've made 3 different expansions. We've teamed up with a programmer to make a beautiful app for the iPad. We've been featured in galleries, including Rochester's own Museum of Play, and we're in schools all over the country. I just couldn't be prouder of this game. I love it to death. Since creating Bentcastle Workshops and reconnecting with the artistic spark of my youth, I've done more than I ever thought could be possible. I've made more than 50 pieces of public sculpture. I've created 10 different card games. I've designed and built hundreds of fairy doors, but that's a completely different story. I have, and right now, currently, I'm teamed up with a partner right here in Rochester, and the 2 of us have a 4-book contract with Harper Collins. We're making a series called Joey and Johnny the Ninjas. So yes, I do get to be a ninja. And it's based on comic books that we made when we were little kids. Obviously a little bit more adult now, but you know, it's still where it came from. It's been a weird and interesting life so far. And it all started with Thor. Can you imagine, picture the first guy to ever tell a story, and just because he's Thor, I have to assume it was a guy, a hairy, bearded god of thunder. That guy told that very first story. Could he imagine how it would affect the future? Know what movies are, or comic books, or the fact that little 5-year-old boys be running around with a cape and a metal bowl on their head? Because that was me. No, he didn't. He was getting by, times were tough, it was a long time ago. No one can imagine what that shape would have held. But that idea inspired other ideas, which inspired other ideas. Each person leaving their mark on it and passing it forward, on and on and on, until the idea was blurred. But what was left was the spark. A spark that even 1,000 years later, 2,000 years later, was so powerful, it could still make a 5-year-old boy want to grow up to become Thor. Now, I'm not saying, and trust me on this, go out and become Thor. Please don't. That's my thing. What I'm really saying is, find the things, remember the things that are in your life that bring you joy, and strive to make them a part of you, a part of your life. But now here's the tricky part. Once you find them, share them. Share them with your friends, with your family, with the world, whatever you're comfortable with, but don't keep them private. Because what we do and what we love can only affect the world if we let it out. I'm not saying that these things have to become your job, but they could be. They don't have to come from your childhood, but it's a great place to start looking. They just have to be the things that make you happy. Find them, explore them, and share them with the world. Because the future isn't written until we start writing it. Now, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and even though I've been up here talking for, 7, 8 minutes now, this probably could have said all of it in a single picture. This is my son. It was his choice, uninfluenced by me. This is his Halloween costume. Thank you.